When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs.
In all of science, we're looking for a balance between data and theory. You don't have to delude yourself with Iron Age fairy tales.
The same spiritual fulfillment that people find in religion can be found in science by coming to know, if you will, the mind of God.
The real world, as it actually is not evil. It's remarkable. And the way to understand the physical world is to use science.
There is a new wave of reason sweeping across America, Britain, Europe, Australia, South America, the Middle East and Africa. There is a new wave of reason where superstition had a firm hold. Teach a man to reason and he'll think for a lifetime.
Hey there, Ireland, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of Freethought Friday with me, Ciarán O'Flynn.
And Ashling O'Brien.
Hey Ashling, how are you?
I'm slightly hungover, but I'm blaming the gentleman sitting on the other side of the table.
That's okay. We're going to blame him for a lot of things. We have a really exciting episode this week. We have with us special guest AronRa. Hello, Aaron. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Aaron was over here for a talk that I think it was the same talk that you gave in Northern Ireland and here. Is that correct?
It was. I'm doing a kind of a tour. It's 15 countries in 6 weeks.
15 countries in 6 weeks.
Yeah, and it's not always the same gig, but I mean, there were some people that wanted me to talk about something else, and I think about, wait, if I'm doing a different place every 2 days,
that's a lot of talks.
How can I get original presentations for just that one?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. I and obviously you need to keep it interesting for yourself as well. So unfortunately, I missed the talk, but Ashling didn't. So I know she's going to have some very interesting follow-up questions on that. But I'm very interested to hear what you had to talk about, and then maybe to have a chat with you about some of your other work that you've done so far. Will we start with yesterday's talk?
We could start with yesterday's. It was really, really interesting, and we had a good turnout here. So this was a talk that Atheists Ireland organised, and I know I had emailed you beforehand, and it's maybe suggested that you might think of some of the political stuff. So it was brilliant that was kind of. What struck me listening to you talk is that the creationism and the political are just intertwined. They're one of the same thing, and it just became really, really evident. I suppose, and I know someone from the floor asked the question, from a European perspective, this is mind-boggling to us. We don't really have creationism on anything close to the same level, and even, I tried to find a creationist for you to debate, which I'm kind of glad we didn't find one, because I think we got more out of the talk than we would have out of a debate, but we just couldn't find one. They just weren't there. So I think from a European perspective, this whole creationism thing is a little bit bewildering to us. So I suppose maybe for people who didn't make the talk, shame on them, maybe you could give us maybe a little overview of what you were speaking about?
Well, what I was talking about is the way that United States politics has been systematically trying to integrate religion with politics, and in an extreme sense. So the most... A religious extremism, in this case, is creationism, because it requires reality denial. And this is a very extreme position wherein you have to force yourself to believe things you know can't be true. For example, snakes cannot talk, but you have to buy this story. And everybody knows on a cursory examination the story of Adam and Eve never really happened. It was never an Adam or an Eve. There certainly wasn't a talking snake. The whole magic tree that if you eat of the fruit of this one, you live forever, and you eat of the fruit of this one, you know good from evil. These are obviously, when we know that, eat of the fruit of the tree of is a parable. It's a phrase implying that these will be the fruits of this course of action. And this kind of language appears elsewhere in the Bible. Everybody understands that eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and eating of the fruit of the tree of life is a metaphor meant to represent that these will be the results of this course of action. And where that language appears elsewhere in the Bible, everybody understands that that's what it means, except in Genesis where it's taken literally. And the funny thing is about that is that people understand that the text mentions this tree of life, tree of eternal life, right? Well, isn't Adam already supposed to have had eternal life? And the story that I heard was that there was the fall was the reason that people die and the reason we have mortality. So what about this tree of eternal life? He obviously didn't eat from that because he was barred from coming back to the garden so that he couldn't eat from that, and it specifies that as well. So what if he never ate from either tree? Does he die of old age, right? Or or does that other tree become completely irrelevant? But they don't examine the mythologies that they believe in. They just force themselves to believe it, and they make all kinds of excuses for how they're going to believe that.
I suppose from a Catholic point of view, we didn't really dwell, as an ex-Catholic, we didn't really dwell on Genesis. Genesis was just kind of brushed over.
Oh, very much so,
Yeah, but I didn't realise this whole thing about the fall and the role that the fall plays, because it doesn't really enter into Catholicism in the same way. So my understanding is that there was no disease or death before Eve ate the apple. Would I be right in this is what the whole setup is? So no animals could die, nothing could be sick, everything would just exist forever.
Well, there's another problem with that too, is that plants create their own food. And the Creator, God, decided that he didn't want us to have that ability. The definition of what it means to be an animal, and humans fall into this definition, is that you have to ingest and digest living cells in order to survive.
Yeah.
So even if you're not killing animals, you're killing something in order to live.
So then they just would be saying that everything just existed in some kind of suspended animation, kind of nothing aged.
There's not a way to rationalize all of this so that it can all make sense viewed as a whole.
Yeah.
That's impossible. So it's not a position that is based on reason.
Okay.
And many times when I've talked to these people, they tell me they're going to believe what they want to believe, and why won't I let them believe what they want to believe? And they're not going to be reasoned with. I'm not going to change my mind. They argue, let's agree to disagree, because I'm not going to change your mind and you're not going to change mine.
So evidence be damned.
Exactly.
It wouldn't matter what you present to them.
The leading proponent of pseudoscience is Ken Ham, CEO of Answers in Genesis. And he's given many talks in which he talks about how to ignore evidence.
Wow.
Yes.
And what did you think then, just on Ken Ham, when Bill Nye debated him? Did you think Bill Nye should have debated Ken Ham, or should he have not given him the credence?
Well, in a strange sense, Bill Nye was my replacement.
Oh, okay.
Because a few months earlier, there was a atheist group in Houston that found out that Ken Ham was going to be a keynote speaker at the Texas Homeschoolers Association. So when he's the keynote speaker, that tells you that the reason all these people are being homeschooled is so that they can be protected against forbidden knowledge, right? Wow. So they challenged Ken Ham to a debate, and they posted me as the person that was supposed to debate him, and he refused to do it. He said that he would only debate if there was a PhD involved. And so P.Z. Myers said he would throw his PhD down. He'd be on the debate stage on one condition: I remain in the game as his partner.
Okay.
All communication stopped after that. But it was a great way to do publicity.
Yes.
So they switched from me to negotiating with somebody that had far more stage presence.
Right.
And I don't think that Bill Nye should have. I think that Bill Nye should have talked with somebody about this before agreeing to it, because one of the things that I would have advised him to do is to not have that debate on Answers in Genesis home turf.
Yes.
Just for the amount that they charged for the seats, they made tens of thousands of dollars already just from that.
Yes.
The publicity that they went on, it was hundreds of thousands of dollars in the end that they'd managed to make on this. And of course, it was a fundraiser thing, so it's supposed to evoke sympathy, right? So believe it or not, Ken Ham losing that debate brought in massive amounts of funds. Now, Ken Ham was at the very end of his term when he was supposed to raise a certain amount of money for his ridiculous art project, and it was all going to fail. It was going to flounder. It was going to go under, unless he could raise a whole bunch of money really, really fast. And Bill Nye just gave him that
all that
opportunity.
Right.
So, I mean, one of the stipulations that I had, if I was going to debate Ken Ham, it was going to be in the Houston Museum of Natural Science.
Yeah.
Neither of us were going to make a dime.
Yes. Yeah.
It's an awful pity that actually I am surprised that Bill Nye actually agreed to what I assume were preconditions that they have it on Ken Ham's terms, because it would seem very obvious to me that that's exactly what Ken Ham was trying to do. Do you think that Bill Nye honestly thought that he might be able to positively affect maybe some minds in the audience? Do you think that's why he continued with the discussion, or with the debate, I should say?
I understand the philosophy. It was a dangerous thing to do, because if you have somebody who's respected in the realm of science and they go up against a pseudoscience apologist, that gives credence to the opposing position. That is as if there is some opposing position. There is no debate in science. I mean, there's only, when people talk about that there are a number of scientists who don't accept evolution, what they're talking about is a list of some 700 or so evangelicals, many of whom are engineers or medical doctors or dentists, but they all have PhDs so that they can claim to be a scientist.
Yeah.
But the number, even when you take that into account, you have like 700 some odd PhDs who, because of their prior religious biases, are going to put on their God glasses, as Ken Ham describes them, and ignore the evidence and just blind themselves to believe what they want to believe. The mainstay of science, especially when you're talking about the geologists and biologists, the earth and life scientists, 99.86% of those people give credence to evolution and none to creationism. And so what you have with the 700 people compared to the more massive number is that less than 1%. It's like 0.14% of earth and life scientists give any credence to creationism at all. And they all do it for exclusively religious reasons. There is not one person that can produce a real, legitimate, verifiably accurate reason to excuse evolution. And they will not acknowledge the vast array of evidence that supports evolution. And I offer all the time to prove evolution to some creationist satisfaction, and the result of that is always the same. They want to be able to reject everything that's told to them by saying, well, that doesn't prove anything, and that's the way that God did it. And with those two excuses, you can deflect everything. But what I do is to engage them. I have to ask them questions, they give the answers. And so they can't contradict their answers, they understand that. They can criticize what I say, but if the bonus is on them to answer the question, and so that they have to express how they acknowledge certain points as we proceed. Yeah. You have to get the premise in order to get the conclusion and so forth. When they realize that I'm engaging them and that they will understand, they can't understand. There's a line in Futurama, the TV show, where somebody says, I don't understand evolution and I have to protect my kids from understanding it. That is absolutely accurate.
Yes, that's what's going on.
Yes.
That's absolutely what's going on.
And what kind of percents then are we talking about, somewhere like Texas, of people who would be creationists? Are we talking about 50%, 60%?
It's 50% in the nation as a whole.
Okay.
It's considerably, or it has been, when I started, when I became an activist some 20 years ago, it was substantially higher than that. Everybody on my block, for example, was just was diehard religious. I conducted a couple of polls in some of the corporate offices that I worked in, and I'll be in an office of a couple hundred people, and there may be 5 people who are secular, and everybody else is not just a believer, they're all the way hardcore, 6,000-year-old God made, and Noah's Ark has been discovered, and all of this, those kind of people. That's 195 out of 200.
Where do you think is this coming from a cultural meme within the U.S. specifically? Is it from a lack of interest in science? I mean, what do you think might be the source of this? Why it's so in particularly prevalent, say, in the United States?
Well, the crux of my talk was that in order to understand science. You have to be taught how to think analytically and critically and examine things, and have an understanding of what skepticism is. But the believer aspect wants to treat skeptics as cynics and say that skeptics are missing out on the bigger picture, that they can't see the awe and wonder, as Oprah Winfrey put it, right? So they have some kind of an advantage in being able to believe what you want and have the power of positive thought is supposed to be able to make wishes come true if you believe hard enough. And it's so Peter Pan. It's irritating how they do this belief system. But when you want to understand evolution, for example, or really anything, it requires a certain degree of intelligent comprehension and accurate source material and an investment of time and money and effort in studies. But religion doesn't require any of that. It requires that you be a complete idiot who doesn't understand anything at all and pretends to know what nobody even can know, and just shoots your mouth off. And then pretend that you're right, and pretend on all the wise, that you're wiser than the wise, and
Well, I know Peter Boghossian has this wonderful phrase. I tend to define the word faith as to accept something as true without evidence, or indeed in the face of opposing evidence. And Peter Boghossian has his definition, which I also very much like. It's pretending to know something you don't, or pretending to know more than you actually do.
Yeah, pretending to know what you don't know. And I don't argue against his definition.
Yeah,
it's very good.
Yeah.
I make mine a little bit more precise so that they understand exactly what we're talking about. That faith is an assertion of complete conviction, which is assumed without reason and defended against all reason.
That is I might just take that one now for myself. Yeah. One of the reasons why I bring this up is because I am curious as to why this is the case in the United States. But unfortunately, this is my own personal experience, and maybe Ashling, you can tell us a bit of yours. But my own personal experience, just even teaching at a third level, is that unfortunately our education system is equally not that interested in critical thinking or analytical skills or questioning at all. And unfortunately,
all of your schools are Catholic schools.
But
they're indoctrinating
which
is the same way.
Yeah, very much the case in primary schools and then secondary schools to a lesser extent. But my worry is that also in third levels, which are not religious based, or very, very few of them are actually religious based. Most of them are all public and secular. There's still not the culture of critical thinking and analytical thinking.
Just because when children are indoctrinated, there's that old Jesuit saying that you give me the child until he is 7 and I will show you the man.
Yeah.
It's not like you can teach children to suddenly start thinking analytically and critically after they've spent a lifetime being groomed to believe what they're told and to not argue.
So my fear in this is that while on the surface it may seem like, well, Irish people don't believe in that silly creationism thing, the reality is it's not that we don't believe in it because we've critically analysed the evidence and we respond well to evidence. It's because simply we have a different faith-based culture which just didn't happen to take on that bit of crazy. Yeah. And so my worry is that, because it's the problem with faith, is anything can be true or anything can be believed, that if the roles were reversed, I don't see any reason why people in Ireland wouldn't be...
hook, line and
not
sinker.
196 out of every 200 people that you come to would also be believing in a 6,000-year-old earth. So,
well, I suppose something comparable then would be that Irish people tend to believe a lot more in miracles and intervention, and maybe the Protestant faiths that would be creationists wouldn't have this belief in miracles and praying to the Virgin Mary and saints intervening on your behalf. And so, it's just it's crazy branded in a different way.
In a different way, yeah.
One of the descriptions that I've heard about these people and the way that they adopt their beliefs is it's not, examine the evidence to accept this conclusion, and now let's look at the next one. That as part of the evolutionary theory, for example, we've got all these different notions that we consider. So let's look at the evidence. Is that one suggested, or is that one supported? And okay, I'll accept this one too. Let's look at the next one, and we pieced. And if any one of them is inaccurate, well, maybe that just needs to be corrected. That doesn't shoot down the entire thing. With religious beliefs, if there's any chink in it, if there's anything that isn't perfect, well, the whole thing falls apart, and the only way to defend it is to pretend that none of it even could be wrong, so that it's a matter of interpretation. But I've seen in the debate between Bill Dembski and Christopher Hitchens, I was live for that. I was there in the audience, and he said that he accepted all of these religious beliefs, the entire thing, the creationism, every aspect of that extreme Christianity as a package deal, without examining any of the supportive evidence. They just don't analyze these things. And to give you another example, I mean, I was talking to somebody that, trying to explain evolution to this person who has deep religious beliefs, and she was one of these. She was part of a religion that didn't embrace creationism. They were tolerant of and accepting of evolution. They want to teach some other aspect of Christianity. So when she went to this church complaining to them that I was trying to get her to believe in evolution, so somebody taps her on the shoulder and says it's okay to believe in evolution and still be part of this church. So she comes back to me later on and she goes, I believe in evolution now.
She had permission.
It gets worse. She says, I believe in evolution now. What is it?
No. And of course, I mean, we've talked about this many times. The root of the problem, because when I was speaking with Michael about the word atheist, and we all have our issues with it, the root of the problem is a valuing of belief more than you're valuing evidence, or a valuing of evidence more than you value belief. And atheists and secularists and rationalists in general value evidence and reason more than they value belief and opinion.
The way that I put it in my talk is that I see a division where you have, at the extremes, two groups where you have one that has a deep-seated emotional need to believe, and on the other extreme, you have those who have only a desire to understand. So and the people who want to believe will tell me that the belief matters more than the truth. They don't ever phrase it quite that way.
Yeah.
But when I show that some critical flaw exists, such that something that they believe is absolutely not true, they'll criticize me for having shown them that, because I'm hurting people, because they want to believe that. They want to believe that with all their heart. And why am I ruining the fantasy? Well, if you realize it's a fantasy, why even embrace it?
Yeah.
Why would you want to believe something that you already know isn't even probably true? But it's all this pretend game, and I think that the reason is because when people realize that we're on this tiny little planet, spinning along in this vast orb, and there's no escape, there's nowhere to go, and this is all there is, and this is all we are, that people get scared.
Yeah.
It's like, finding yourself floating in one of those little teeny life preservers in the middle of the Pacific, and there's nobody out there to help you. So maybe that's where they create this imaginary. I don't know where it comes from, and I don't know what good it does. It's because I'm all the way on this other extreme. I have no concept for how faith can be valuable to anyone, even in the perspective of a placebo.
Yeah.
And can I ask you actually on that? Because I was thinking about, there was definitely a period in my life where I did value faith. I'm not sure I was ever at a point where I valued it more, but I obviously valued it more in certain little cases, But did you have that experience in your life where you raised as someone who, what I would call a faithist, someone who valued faith, or were you always closer to that extreme that you saw?
I was always closer to this other extreme. Now, I believed all kinds of crazy crap when I was a kid. I had been told that I was encouraged to believe everything that I heard, everything that I read, everything that I saw on TV is true because you see it on TV, right? So consequently, there was a time in my teen years when I believed everything necessary to be a Ghostbuster. Remember that interview where she says, do you believe in the Loch Ness Monster, the theory of Atlantis, and full trance mediums, and all? I bought all that. And the thing is I believed all that not because of faith. I had believed because I had been lied to. I'd been told that there was all this scientific evidence of telekinesis and astral projection and Kirlian photography showing life force and all this. All of this pseudoscience mumbo jumbo. But when I start looking into every one of these things, trying to get what is the scientific update, try to find a scientific article on Kirlian photography. They don't exist because it doesn't exist. It's a fraud.
Yeah.
The thing about with the Russians moving the ball bearings with the power of their hands, using telekinesis or whatever. No, it's magnets. It's the way they move the table with their knee or whatever. It's an illusion. It's all set up as a fraud. The Kirlian photography thing was the last thing to collapse for me, because the Kirlian photography in 1970s, they had this pseudoscience documentary called In Search Of, and it was hosted by Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock in Star Trek. So of course everything he said sounded logical. So he's showing
his voice is the voice of logic.
And it was such a way to dupe a 12-year-old kid, you know? So I'm watching this show, and they have this leaf, and they put the leaf on the photoelectric plate, and when they take a picture of it, you see the leaf and all the veins in the leaf, and it's all illustrated in these tiny phosphorescent blue sparks. It's a really beautiful thing. And this is just the electrostatic within the chemical reactions within the living being. Okay, you can dismiss it that way. But when you clip off half the leaf, so now you put just half the leaf on the plate, on the initial exposure, you see only the half of the leaf that you're supposed to. But on an overexposure, then the other half of the leaf appears. And so this was proof of life force, living energy, midichlorians from Star Wars, however you want to describe it. But that's what I was looking at, or so I thought, until I grew up and I got a hold of the internet, and I remember looking up what would have been the advances in Kirlian photography lately, you know? So right around Y2K, when, you know, I start looking it up. And what I found instead was I found an article written by the writers of In Search Of, admitting that they just made up stuff that they thought people would be interested in. It's purely entertainment. There was no truth to that show ever at all whatsoever.
Wow.
And so that was, as I said, the last thing that I still clung on to. I had psychic experiences, paranormal encounters. You know, I was a neo-pagan occultist once upon a time back in the early 80s, you know, as many people were, especially those who liked metal and black clothing, you know. But I realized that these experiences that I was having, that even was shared with other people, there was a way to manufacture that in your own mind. So that even though I vividly remember seeing and experiencing these things, I know that it didn't really happen. And it's a hard thing to relate to something that you remember happening and know that it didn't happen because it couldn't have happened.
Yes. Yeah.
I think actually, I mean, that communal experience that religions in particular have grabbed onto and indeed then used as one of the key reasons of why I think they remain relatively vibrant. I think my understanding that could actually, as you said, be replicated without the need for faith was the final straw in my kind of wavering faith. I was beginning to move away from it by the mid-2000s. But I wasn't able to fully admit it and go all the way. And I think that's because I, like many other people, enjoyed that communal experience. I was going to Mass right up until I was 22, 23, even though it was in direct conflict with my sexuality. And but once I realised that, I think, like when you were saying, you realised how that photography that you were talking about, how once you realised how that works, then you're able to separate the wheat from the chaff, I suppose. That the really interesting, inspiring stuff that Carl Sagan would say you should be in awe over, the science, the physics, what's happening there, from the wishful thinking that's been added on top of it, the mystical top coat of marzipan, as Eddie Izzard calls it.
And I don't want to comment on this because it's on the same lines. A couple of days ago we were in Scotland, and our taxi driver to the airport told me that he had manifested a new car. Manifested? How do you manifest a car? And he says, well, he got it somehow this was related to the psychic messages that he was receiving from...
It's like this book, The Secret.
I don't know, he didn't mention that, but he said that he was receiving psychic messages from Michael Jackson.
Oh, okay.
that might not be quite the secret, but
And something about his friend who was dowsing things, and his dowsing would lead to great riches or something, and it wasn't even something that even relates to dowsing. If you know what dowsing is, no, dowsing is using a stick to find water. It's not for manifesting a new taxi cab. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But what's important to understand is that people want to say that there's a benefit of the doubt, right? You know, say they don't want to imagine, and they say this all the time, that anything is possible.
Yeah.
Well, if there's any believers listening to this podcast, I want to stress that not everything is possible. Monkeys cannot possibly fly out of my ass. That's just one of many things that are not. I cannot jump to the moon. That is not possible, right?
Although I think you'd sell more books if you could. I mean, certainly the first one, the monkeys.
Before a scientist can say that anything is possible, they have to have some sort of precedent or parallel, or at least some confirmed scenario indicating that such a thing is possible. Otherwise, you know, we have precedents and parallels implying that certain things are not possible. That I do not have the joules of energy in my thigh muscles to leap to the moon. You know, there's just, the math doesn't work, and so these things are not possible. But more important than that, is that when you go to believe something, and I believe that belief should be tentative. You might consider the possibility, but that doesn't mean you have to believe that it's true, right? Whenever there could be a doubt, there should be. And when you believe something, or where you start to suspect that something might be true and you begin to investigate it, ask yourself this: where is the truth of it? Because truth isn't just what you assert as true. It's not just what you want to believe. You can't like look at the Bible and say absolute truth, because it's an absolute lie. But the way that I define truth is that truth is that any statement that can be shown to be true. So if you can show that some aspect of what you believe, show that it is actually true. Is it something that you can verify? This at least is correct, and I can prove this much. Then you can examine the other things. But people don't look for the truth. They don't say, what is the truth of it? And when you give me the Bible, that's a great challenge. Show me the truth of it. Oh, this is the absolute truth? Okay, good. Show me the truth. There ain't none in it.
I suppose, something I very often think about when you, especially when you're talking about faith-based beliefs, is having those conversations with faithists and how you actually begin to just break down those beliefs. And I find, because I do the Atheist Ireland information table, and it generally goes one of a few ways, where someone will walk up and they'll assert, oh, you're Satanists, or you're all going to hell, and they'll run away. They don't want to have a conversation. But you do get people who have faith-based beliefs who do want to have a conversation. And I know that Peter Boghossian's manual for creating atheists goes into this in detail. But what's your approach then to just starting to plant those seeds, to start breaking down those faith-based beliefs? Because you don't want to go in too strong too quick, or do you just go for it and... Unfortunately, my wife thinks that my approach is way too blunt. I think she described it one time as you don't even use lube.
That is quite correct. Now, we are still talking about...
always use lube.
Yes.
Always use
We might edit this part out.
So there's no soft approach. I don't know how to do a soft coaxing approach, but when other people want to address this, I think it's important to understand that when you're dealing with a belief, and the way that we know that beliefs cause people to act certain ways. We know when people come away from their religion, for example, like with the Clergy Project has shown all these people that no longer believe their own nonsense, and even though they're ministers in some church, so when they no longer believe, they discover that they start voting more liberal. They become more tolerant of homosexuality, of other ethnicities and so forth. So we know that there's a behavior pattern that's associated with this belief system. So the way that I think we need to look at the belief is we don't look at the person as though the person is the enemy, or the person is. It's more like that a person has an illness, and the illness is similar to being drunk. Okay, so we know that there are certain behavior patterns associated with being drunk. And so you're just going to try to sober that person. And that can be difficult because being drunk sometimes feels good, and people want to hang on to that. I often associate religious belief to like smoking. Now, if you've ever been a smoker, there's been this, and you quit, then you'll understand what I'm talking about here. But you smoke because it makes you feel good. It makes you think you look good. It makes you sexy and cool. And then when you finally do quit, there comes a point where you have finally broken that habit, and you begin to realize what poison that was that you were taking into your body that whole time. And religion is very much like that. Yeah. It's a crutch. It's a dependency. It's an addiction. It helps you solve all these little problems that maybe your mind can't at that stage, or for whatever reason. But we need to treat it as like this is kind of like a chemical dependency. It is. People do treat it that way. I mean, all these people that tell you that they became Christian. Why? Not for any reason that makes sense or would actually compel anybody to believe that, but because I used to be a drug addict. Well, great. So you've replaced a chemical addiction for an emotional addiction, but it's the same thing.
And the therapies for drug addiction and alcohol addiction build on that, because you've handed everything over to a higher power.
Exactly.
So they're playing on that. So they know they can just substitute one for the other.
Yeah.
I know we're coming up on time, so
yeah.
I wanted to ask, before I ask one more question, did you get any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to, someone who's hit my radar recently, a woman named Mary Lou Booner. She's the Texas State Board candidate for the Texas State Board of Education, and got 48% of the vote on Super Tuesday. You've come across this?
I was going to ask about Donald Trump, but I think I'm going to leave that out now.
This is the woman who's claiming that Barack Obama was a male prostitute.
Yeah.
And to fund his drug habits, and she got 48% of the vote on Super Tuesday.
That gives you an idea where the Texas head is.
I read it and I was like, look, is this The Onion?
But this actually strikes me as actually being quite... It's the same question that I was going to ask you in relation to Donald Trump. I'm like aghast at how people are considering voting for a particular individual who's come out with such crazy, inconsistently crazy nonsense. But I guess it's the same. This Mary Lou situation.
The nice thing about the people on the Board of Education is that it is possible to arrange meetings with them individually.
Okay.
And I've done that with some of my allies on the board. And I intend to do that with this woman too. If she gets the office, I'm going to go into her office and I'm going to either record an interview with her, or in that, I also want to make the challenge that I've made to so many other people that I would like to prove evolution to her satisfaction. So that, and not just on a word game, but that I would convince her of it so completely that she will declare herself an evolutionist for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And I want to make that challenge on a recorded interview to see where it goes. Because, I mean, they always refuse. They always, at some point...
You'd imagine that they'd want to prove you wrong, that it's, that they've got God on their side. What can possibly go wrong for them?
Well, I have to be honest. I mean, there's only been one person that has ever taken the challenge and gone to the end. And that person married me.
Okay, so which I think is a fantastic story. You tell this story that you met Lelandra on a discussion board.
We did. We met on ChristianForums.com. And she was an old Earth creationist at that point. And I'm glad that I ran into her because I had only ever encountered people who were very dishonest in the defense of their belief. But you have to remember that some people believe for honest reasons because they think that everybody believes that. There's got to be some truth to it, right? And maybe they just haven't figured out, there must be something that everybody else knows that maybe I don't know. That's the honest approach. And I just haven't met a creationist that ever used an honest approach. And what I often say now is that it is not possible to defend creationism honestly, but that doesn't mean that you can't have or be an honest creationist. But once you get into this discussion, once you start being shown the evidence, you very quickly have to make a choice, whether you're going to remain honest or whether you're going to remain creationist. Yes. Because very early on into that discussion, it will be obvious that you can't be both.
So most choose dishonesty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I know your time with us is short here because you have to move on. This sounds like we're killing you here, but I mean to better things during your stay here. So thank you so much, Aaron, for coming along and having this discussion with us. And hopefully maybe the next time you're around, we can schedule another one, maybe a follow-up. See if Mary Lou has been elected or Mr. Trump, for that matter. But thanks very much, and we will talk to you again in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron.
Show you what this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners. Even defend the tactics that are used to imprison them. A conquered mind, trying to conquer other minds, selling. Come out here, I'll show you what this looks like imprisonment. What's worse is that the prisoners don't know that they're prisoners.